Welcome to this week's episode of Insider. I'm Lidar Gravé-Lazi, and I'll be your host. Tonight, we take a look into U.S. President Donald Trump's first week in office and how his actions and policies are already impacting Israel and reshaping the Middle East. From his role in the hostages deal to the ceasefire with Lebanon, from releasing shipments of military supplies to Israel to his new plan for Gaza. And of course, we'll also discuss his vision for renewing the Abraham Accords and containing the Islamic Republic of Iran. And joining me for the discussion in the studio is Ron Campius, the Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and by Zoom, Dr. Dan Diker, President of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you both for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, so Ron, I want to start with you. I want to hear from both of you a general, sort of question before we get into the details. How would you characterize President Trump's first week in office, specifically with regards to his policies towards Israel?
I think that the president has made clear that he wants action. He's made it clear, first and foremost, to the Netanyahu government, to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He talked about hell to pay when he was still a president-elect, and the hell to pay was, I think, Israel's, or not Israel itself, but Netanyahu's, if he didn't concede on the hostage release plan and on the ceasefire, and he did, and you're already seeing success, and success begets success. He's now, not just because of Israel, but what happened also with Colombia, where he got them to agree to accept migrants. He's starting a really good honeymoon, and Israel's part of that success, and that could have a roll-on effect in terms of his efforts to expand the Abraham Accords and to sustain the ceasefire in the Middle East.
And Dan, turning to you, what do you think of Trump's first week as president?
I think it can be summed up in two words: maximum pressure. And I think that the sense is, I think, as Ron Campius says, there would be hell to pay. I think that was more directed at Hamas and Iran than it was at Israel. But clearly, President Trump wanted to be able to say, as he did in his inauguration speech, that his maximum pressure campaign actually triggered the most consequential return of hostages in exchange for other concessions, very painful concessions that Israel had to make. But certainly there was the first time there was any kind of movement in the past year. And I would submit to you that even though Israel is paying a very high price for this, what we call dribs and drabs, hostage return, 3 hostages a week campaign, it is actually much more advantageous to Israel than any deal under the Biden administration that simply didn't work out. And clearly, President Trump, even in his first week in office, and Israel are aligned on the issue of maximum pressure on the Iranian regime and maximum pressure on the Iranian proxy terror system or terror network. And in a third sense, Israel and the United States are very much aligned on the need to completely destroy Hamas going forward. You've heard this from his security and his diplomatic cabinet going forward. So I think there is a lot of alignment between Israel and the United States, notwithstanding the fact that there was a maximum pressure campaign also on Israel to accept this very painful initial deal on terrorists for hostages, which Israel accepted. Because at the end of the day, we are in a long war against radical Islam, and I think that the president and his advisors are very aware of that.
Mm-hmm. So Dan's saying that there is alignment, but Ron, I want to ask you, in his inauguration address, U.S. President Trump said that he wants to be a peacemaker and a unifier, and he's called essentially to end all wars, Russia, Ukraine, but also Gaza and Lebanon. What do you make of this? I mean, this doesn't sound like he's aligned with Israel because, in Israel, I think there is the expectation that once the ceasefire resumes, Israel will continue its war against Hamas.
I think Dan's right, and insofar as Hamas is concerned, I do think that there is an alignment on wanting to destroy Hamas. I don't know to what degree that's going to succeed, because Hamas is now filling in the vacuum of the ceasefire. We saw that in the release of the four lookout women that were released where they were forced to march on the stage, and there was like the signs of Hamas pervasive. We're going to have to see how that plays out. I think that there might be room for tensions as far as Iran goes, because I think that the Israeli view of Iran is that there needs to be more military action. There may need even to be a plan to take out the nascent, or not so nascent, the ongoing nuclear weapons program. And I don't know to what degree Trump is committed to that. Certainly, he's surrounded by some people who have expressed that commitment in the past. I think most significantly Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State, but he is also surrounded by people like J.D. Vance and others who are much more cautious on Iran. So it's interesting. You know, you've got the whole cabinet of rivals thing that Lincoln had, that others have had, that Obama had, and what we're going to have to find out is which of those rivals is ultimately going to be determinative in what Trump does.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Dan, I want to turn to you now. You know, there are sort of two schools of thought surrounding President Trump. You know, one you can characterize as America First, and sort of the J.D. Vance, as Ron said, school of thought. And then there's, you know, the Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio school of thought. Very sort of different here, and it'll be interesting to see. And, you know, we do have Steve Witkoff coming to the Middle East this week. What is on his agenda? I mean, as you said, he pushed for Israel to accept this ceasefire deal, and it's very interesting because President Trump and President Biden basically don't see eye to eye on anything, and yet when it came to the hostages deal, to the ceasefire deal with Hezbollah, suddenly they were all in agreement. So how do you explain all of this?
Well, first of all, it's a very big question. We have a very limited amount of time.
Yeah.
So let me just say, I think there are three schools of thought, not two schools. There are three schools of thought. There's the isolationist school, which, as you mentioned correctly, is represented more by the vice president. There is the internationalist school, which is represented more by Mike Waltz, Secretary of State Rubio, Mike Huckabee, the incoming U.S. ambassador to Israel, and also UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik. These are internationalists. These are people that are squarely behind Israel, and these are people in his diplomatic and national security cabinet, the internationalist school, that really understands that America's power projection and primacy must be key principles of American foreign policy. But here is where things get sticky. There's a third school of thought, and I would even call it a third camp. And that third camp is what I would define as the woke right camp, that is represented by real anti-Semites like Candace Owens and Jeffrey Sachs and even Tucker Carlson. These are people that are influencing Trump as well, that speak on his behalf, but are clearly those that are trying to impose upon the entire all three camps and the president himself, that Israel is really responsible, in their view, for trying to drag the United States into unwanted wars and unwanted conflicts. And I think that the tension between these three camps is going to be a very complex and does not guarantee any particular outcome. And that is why it is my view, and I think it's our view at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, that a very tight alliance, intellectual alliance, moral clarity, alliance based on moral clarity between Jerusalem and Washington is absolutely essential for stability, security, and prosperity in the Middle East. And for those in Israel who have said, let's just wait for President Trump to come in and everything will be okay, I think that those views are short-sighted. There are a lot of different, as we've shown, views within Washington, but ultimately it's America's primacy and power projection as the world superpower and the world's, I would say, moral policeman and a strategic implementer of security and stability that is going to have to win the day in the Middle East, not only for Israel, but for the entire region.
Very interesting points that you brought up there, three different schools of thought. You know, Ron, I want to ask you about Steve Witkoff. Which camp does he fall into? You know, Trump's envoy, he's visiting Saudi Arabia, set to arrive in Israel this week. What do you expect will be on the agenda, and which camp does he fall into?
Oh, he's very much, I think, in what Dan would describe as the internationalist camp. I think he's somebody who wants to see the United States have a leading role in the world, and he wants to, and I think he's very much invested in that happening in the Middle East. The guy shows a lot of care for Israel, and what we can see from this week is, I think, Trump wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize. That's very much on his agenda. But not just that, he wants to see the more comprehensive. He wants to build on the Abraham Accords in a way that Biden had hoped to, but was not able to. And so bringing in Saudi Arabia, that would create a momentum towards a more stable Middle East. The question is, can he bring in Saudi Arabia, and at what cost to Israel? As Dan pointed out, there was heavy pressure on Israel to make very painful concessions towards the hostage release. What else is in store in terms of, not just sticks, but carrots in terms of a Saudi deal? Obviously, normalization of relationships, a peace treaty with Saudi Arabia would be a huge carrot, but what are the more painful disincentives that would be packed into that, for this government particularly?
Absolutely. And Dan, I want to turn now to talk about the head of the snake, Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran, we should say. Before the election, Trump was adamant that Israel should attack Iran's nuclear sites. Now he's speaking, saying different things. He's saying that he prefers a diplomatic solution. So what is his official stance now? Will he allow Israel, should it want to attack Iran?
Well, it's a very good question. The one thing that's very clear is that President Trump of the first term is facing a reality that was very different than the reality he faces now. In President Trump's first term, he offered the deal of the century, and in the context of the deal of the century, maximum pressure on Iran in non-military ways. President Trump is the art of the deal, and he was very effective in pulling out of the JCPOA together at Prime Minister Netanyahu's urging. And I think it was a correct decision. If you looked at Iran, they were basically broke, and they were subject to much greater public restiveness within Iran that saw eye to eye with Israel, with the United States pulling out of the JCPOA. However, in 2025, President Trump inherits a world that just saw not the deal of the century, but the massacre of the century. And that massacre was planned, supplied, directed, and inspired by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So it's a very different world today, in which the Bashar Assad regime collapses, in which the tentacles of the Iranian octopus have been lopped off, largely Hezbollah and Hamas, even though they're still struggling to survive. And therefore, the reality that President Trump inherits in the Middle East is far different than the one he inherited in 2016. So it's clear that he wants to end all wars, but the Middle East has a unique capability of preventing certain visions of the Middle East in the West from taking place, because this is one major black swan event in the Middle East. Things change from moment to moment. It's clear that President Trump has already begun to remove some of the limitations that the Biden administration had imposed on Israel in terms of weapons and ammunition shipments. I am a strong believer that President Trump would allow Israel to do what it needs to do militarily in order to cut off the head of the octopus. Israel already proved that it can do that by stripping naked the Iranian regime's air defense systems and other sensitive sites, not all of which can be detailed on this program. And so I think it's clear that President Trump knows, as someone whom the Iranian regime tried to assassinate before he came into office, the dangers that the Iranian regime presents. I would not put it beyond the president to cooperate and collaborate with Israel in some sort of military action, the way the United States had already done it in the last months, even under the Biden administration. But we'll have to wait and see exactly to what extent he is prepared to commit American military assets in order to overthrow this satanic regime in Tehran.
Mm-hmm. And Ron, I see you nodding along. I mean, would you agree with that assessment that President Trump would likely back an Israeli strike against Iran?
I think that, what you were talking about before, where he was during the election campaign, when he criticized Biden specifically for saying, don't hit the oil, don't hit the nuclear, but hit the military sites. And that, I think, could be understood as Trump saying to Biden, what are you giving instructions to Israel? Let Israel do what it wants. The complication here now is that Trump is president, and I'm sure he still does believe that Israel should do what it wants if it can get away with it. The question is, is he going to be committed to, we don't know what the logistics are of, let's say, taking out the nuclear weapons program. Does it involve bunker busting bombs that the United States would supply? The indications are, because he's released the 2,000-pound bombs that Israel had wanted that Biden held up. Perhaps he would allow, Israel to have the bunker busting bombs. But would it provide Israel with sea and air cover if it were to launch an attack on Iran the way that the Biden administration did? Given Trump's preference for not involving, that's his overriding, I think, foreign policy, not involving American troops, America in wars that he doesn't see a clean outcome from, that's an open question, I think.
Right, and
but it has to be said. Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
To
Absolutely.
add a point. What's very important for us to understand on this very important insider program, ILTV Insider, is that the Iranian regime since 1979 has prosecuted an ongoing war against the United States. What Israel experienced on October 7th, I would maintain, was equally a continued attack against the United States and its allies. Let's remember that in 1979, the Islamic regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran took 52 American hostages and kept them for 444 days until the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. And since then, they killed hundreds of Americans in the 1980s in Lebanon through the Hezbollah proxy, and continued in Iraq through other Iranian proxies, and tried to assassinate President Trump. There are thousands of Iranian operatives that are flooding the U.S. southern border through Mexico in collaboration with Mexican drug cartels. The United States continues to be under attack, both kinetically and in other non-military ways, by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So this is the narrative that has to be emphasized again and again. Iran is at war with the United States and has been for the last 45, 46 years. This is not a war against Israel only. This is a key point that has to be underscored again and again and again in order for President Trump and his administration to make the correct decisions against America's number one enemy.
Absolutely. And we are almost out of time, but Ron, I do want to hear from you, looking forward. I think Dan touched upon this a little bit about the Abraham Accords. Trump has said his main goal for the Middle East is to bring in more countries to the Abraham Accords. Do you think that this desire to achieve peace, to win the Nobel Prize, as you said, could actually come at a cost to Israel, perhaps a cost that Israel is not willing to pay? And is Israel even in a position to be able to say no to President Trump?
The latter question, I don't think that Israel is in a position to say no to President Trump. I think we just saw that this week, and we're going to see more of that perhaps further down the line. I don't know. I think it's going to be a very tough row for Netanyahu to hoe, considering his coalition partners. Israel have a price to pay in terms, it depends on how one defines price. The Saudis have been quite insistent until now that they want a path to Palestinian statehood. His daughter's father-in-law, who is leading Middle East negotiations, in an interview with Le Point, which is a French news magazine, was really emphatic in saying there's a difference between demanding Palestinian statehood now and a path to Palestinian statehood. Maybe there's room for there for some kind of nuanced take, some kind of creative ambiguity that because this government and I think even the opposition right now is saying that right now is absolutely not right for Palestinian statehood, given what happened on October the 7th. So there's that tension there. That's the price Israel would have to pay. But maybe there's some kind of ambiguity in saying, OK, we agree on a path to Palestinian statehood, and we're going to discuss what that means further down the line.
All right, and Dan, I'm turning to you for final thoughts.
Final thoughts, I think, it would be to emphasize the fact that the Saudi Arabia is far more interested in receiving security and defense recognition from the United States, including weaponry, including a status of non-NATO, a special non-NATO ally. They're much more interested in that than they are in a Palestinian state. They remember what happened in 2017 in the Saudi-sponsored and Saudi-blessed workshop in what's called Peace to Prosperity in Manama, Bahrain, when the Palestinian Authority BDS'd everyone involved in that deal. It's very clear that Israel is not going to allow another 7th of October mass murder, massacre, rape, and kidnapping to occur again. At this juncture, with the current Palestinian Authority leadership and a West Bank population that overwhelmingly supported the mass murder on October 7th, there is no Israeli government, left, center, or right, that is going to submit to another Oslo-type experiment that ended up costing and destroying thousands and thousands and thousands of lives.
All right, well, that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you to our guests, Dr. Dan Diker and Ron Campius, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in. And for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our ILTV channels and to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Have a safe and pleasant evening.